understanding mental health, a good foundation for that is understanding that all of our stress and suffering is a result of our misperception of self. We are designed to create, from the moment we are born, we're designed to create a false identity. And that false identity can also be called an ego. It can also be called a hierophant.
Awekenge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asekho. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Mythos. I'm your host, Asekho, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
You share more about your life before you began meditating and what led you to start this practice.
Well, I was after finishing an undergraduate and graduate degree, I entered the business world and competed in the business world for about 40 years. And well, that's not true. I guess it'd be about 30 years. Had never put a pencil to that before. And so I retired early. The objective of retiring was an awakening that what I was doing was not fulfilling. It wasn't bringing me the happiness that I thought that should be available. And so I began to search elsewhere for answers. And my academic training was in psychology. And so consequently, I reverted to that, philosophy and psychology, and used that as a foundation to explore alternatives and essentially provide services to others as I learned them, to be honest with you. So it became a reciprocal relationship with my patients to explore myself in the process of guiding them to healing.
As you said that being in the business world, in the business field, actually, that you found it unfulfilling. And I believe that most of the people sometimes feel like that they just go into some of them goes into business of just getting the money, that's all, of not acknowledging that how when it comes to decision making, when it comes to your mental well-being, you don't consider it. And how was the road of going to the mental health field very difficult? Did you in a way have habits that you had from your business into the business field?
Well, it was frustrating, and it renewed frustrations that I had from my academic studies of psychology. It is my studied observation that the reason that mental health services are really primitive and deficient in what they offer to people who need help is their misunderstanding of what the mental is. The mental by its very nature is a derivative of the mind. And there's a significant lack of understanding of what a mind is. And so consequently, for the most part, psychology in particular studies behavior. And behavior is like studying behavior is like studying the contrails of a jet airplane that you see 35,000 feet above your head. And your objective is to study the airplane, but all you can see is the contrail. And so consequently, you make guesses and suppositions based upon what you can see, but it really tells you little or nothing about the airplane itself. And so consequently, not having a consensus of opinion of what a mind is, psychiatry treats the brain primarily with chemicals that, for the most part, numb our awareness. And as it turns out, awareness is the one tool that we all share and inherently have that is both the discovery tool and the healing tool that we need in order to repair distortions of perception that cause us what is deemed to be mental illness or simply stress and suffering for those not so diagnosed. And so consequently, it brings us back to the concept of a mind, body, spirit. We are a mind, body, spirit. And the ordering of that sequence is important to understand because it is the sequence that we use in order to further our consciousness evolution, which is the objective of our life and the necessary steps in order to get us off of the elementary levels of simply trying to find a greater degree of happiness, how to find happiness. Happiness is the measure of how we are doing. And so consequently, the happier we are, the better we are doing, both in our mental health healing and healing of false perceptions of self and furthering our advancement along the enlightenment path.
And you mentioned the lack of understanding what mental is, and I would agree with you with that in terms of that, because it back in, I think it was April, if I'm not mistaken, when it was Autism Month, whereas we had I work at a disability department at Nelson Mandela University, whereas we touch on different types of disability and promote and advocate for disabilities. And as you know that autism it's an invisible disability, and it has its own characteristics when one is diagnosed with it. And one thing that I found it very challenging or surprising, I would say, is the fact that there's this thing of misdiagnosing people in terms of when it comes to mental well-being, in terms of these mental health disorders. And in terms of that, what would you say that what type of approach that needs to be taken when it comes to the understanding of the mental?
Okay, well, understanding mental health, a good foundation for that is understanding that all of our stress and suffering is a result of our misperception of self. We are designed to create, from the moment we are born, we are designed to create a false identity. And that false identity can also be called an ego. It can also be called a hierophant. It's all the same thing, just different names for the same thing. This is nothing more than a bundle of beliefs that we collect either through osmosis from the people around us without really thinking about it, or that we intentionally include in our false identity. And we begin this from the moment that we're born. As soon as we're born, we begin processing thoughts. Elementary, obviously, is we're infants, but that becomes more complex as we grow and mature. But the objective of creating this false identity is to get more of what we like. We're all motivated to get more of what we like. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and get more of what I don't like today. Everyone has, whether in the forefront of their mind or in the back of their mind, that they want to get more of what they like. Now, what you like may be entirely different from what I like, and everybody listening to this may have a different perspective of what it is that they like. But that notwithstanding, that is a result of our experiences that we have. Every experience, we perceive an experience to last some period of time. That's 30. But that actually is comprised of dozens of thoughts. Each individual thought is a complete experience. And we are obligated, before we can go to the next thought, the next experience, to make a decision about that thought that we are currently processing. And that decision, very simply, is the decision that this thought feels good and I like it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it. That in and of itself is a complete emotion. That's all there is to an emotion. All the names that we have contrived to describe emotions are actually conditions of being. That's the condition that we are in at the time that we're processing that thought. So if we're in a condition of grief, every thought that we process is going to be adjudicated from the perspective of being in grief. If we're in a happy mood, then we are going to interpret every experience from that lens, through that lens of being in a happy mood, in that happy condition. And so we can have an experience today and adjudicate that experience to be unpleasant, unhappy. We can have virtually the same experience in 6 months and have a completely different perspective of it because we are different. We perceive that experiences, that thoughts bring emotion with it, but they don't. If you and I were sitting in if we were sitting on a park bench and a cloud came over our head and it started to rain, we would both get wet.
Yeah.
The reason we would get wet is because the cloud brought the water. It brought the rain. But if we were sitting on that same park bench and a passerby gets shot in front of us and falls down dead, you and I would interpret that experience differently. We would not feel exactly the same emotion because the experience did not bring the emotion. We would interpret that experience according to how we are at the time. Every experience is absolutely neutral of any emotion. It is incumbent upon us to interpret that experience according to how we are. Now, we have the privilege of having every experience that comes to us bring us a message. The message, if we interpret that experience, if I'm in the United States and there's an experience that happens on the other side of the world, say in India, and I'm unaware of that, I don't interpret that experience, but it's still part of the earthly experience. And so that experience is not meant for me because I did not have to adjudicate the like or dislike disposition of that thought. But if we participate in an experience and we are obligated to make that adjudication of the experience, either I like it or I don't like it, then that means that that experience is bringing us a message about us. If we like the experience, then it is a reinforcement of the beliefs that we've incorporated into our false identity. that we need to keep that because we're getting more of what we like. If we don't like it, in other words, if we experience something that does not meet our expectations, then that is a message to us to become aware of what it is that we have incorporated into this false identity that we need to become aware of and let go of, because it is a message to us. Now, if you think of every experience that we have as a homework assignment, and every homework assignment has a textbook assigned to it. So you get a homework assignment. If you just decide that you're not going to do your homework, that doesn't mean that the homework is no longer due. It just means you didn't do it. So we get to keep that homework assignment, and we have to carry that textbook with us, excuse me, until we do our homework. As soon as we do our homework, then we can put the textbook down and never have to look at it again. But until we do that, then we carry that textbook with us. So if you don't do your homework for 30 days, then you have 30 textbooks that you have to carry with you. And I'm sure being a student, you understand that textbooks are heavier than regular books.
Definitely.
Okay. All right. So we accumulate these lessons, these messages to us over the course of a lifetime, and they become heavier and heavier. We keep them in the form of an emotion, and that's called emotional baggage. When a person is diagnosed, for example, with depression, they have a variety of side effects of depression, but the one ingredient, the one characteristic that is universal, that everyone that is experiencing depression feels, is a heaviness. So you have to ask, what could possibly feel heavy? Well, what feels heavy is the emotional baggage that they are carrying. And why it affects us so dramatically is that we all have potentially the same amount of energy available to us. That energy is required to power our mind, our body, everything that we are, everything that we do. If that energy is diverted carrying that emotional baggage, then we don't have adequate energy in order to run our mind properly, to run our body properly. And so things begin to falter. If you imagine yourself as being an electrical outlet, and someone plugs in a dozen hair dryers to you, none of those hair dryers is going to run properly. They would run, but they just kind of run. They just barely run. But as you unplug those hair dryers, the one that's supposed to be plugged in there runs just fine. The same is true of our energy and our emotional baggage carrying. If you imagine that before you were born, you were told that your mission in life is to run down to the end of the street. All you had to do was run down to the end of the street and you would have a successful life. And they gave you a new pair of running shoes and a new running outfit, and you look really, really sharp. And so you start running, and then as you start running, they hand you a 300-pound ball of concrete and say, your mission is the same, but you have to carry this 300-pound ball of concrete with you. Well, your thought and your practice would be that would be next to impossible. So you still got to accomplish your mission, but somehow you've got to get rid of this 300-pound ball of concrete. It is absolutely permissible to put the whole 300-pound ball of concrete down at one time, but it is improbable to do that because this is all the accumulated messages that have been brought to you over your lifetime that you haven't learned. And so it's necessary to learn the lessons that have accumulated this ball of concrete. And so we begin to take chunks out of the ball of concrete and to reduce the weight of and the size of the ball of the concrete. We do that by healing. That is the healing. We're taking chunks out of this ball of concrete until the entire ball of concrete is dissipated. We have full access to the energy that we have been allocated, which is the same potential as everybody else, and we achieve our life mission of running down to the end of the street.
Mm.
So healing is nothing more. It is synonymous with the enlightenment process. People perceive, for the most part, that enlightenment is a destination because of the successes that the Buddha had.
Mm.
Enlightenment is the process. It's not a destination. It is the process. And so the process requires that we heal the emotional baggage that we have collected, which is where therapy can be very dramatically effective. But we also have to escalate our awareness to the point of becoming aware of the beliefs that we have incorporated into this false identity and begin to surrender those. Because if not, then we are encountering, we are re-stressing ourselves as long as we defend and protect this false identity.
Mm. 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 And speaking about false identity, we, in a way, we, in terms of speaking about it, this in different perspective, and as someone that has created this false identity of claiming to be this someone that I'm not, it's quite hard to recognize to some people. And also sometimes I feel like when it comes to me, it is its effect of that I have unhealed trauma. I have this emotional baggage that I'm running away from. So and how does one recognize that there are in terms of when it comes to self-awareness, how does one recognize that this is this is what this facade they are putting in their head? It's something that it's not them, it's something else.
Well, while we are in our period where we are defending and protecting this hierophant, this false perception of self, then we are trying to manipulate the world around us in order to give us more of what we like. In other words, we're trying to trick the world into giving us more of what we like by amending how we dress, how we think, how we behave, the people that we associate, all of those things that go into our perception of self. And it is not possible for others to give us what we'd like, because invariably when you do a reductive process with everyone, what they like is love. But we don't know what love is, which compounds the situation. Okay. So we're trying to explore ourselves. We're trying to explore love. Our authentic self is already there. We all have an authentic self, but if you think of the authentic self as the gold, but you buried the gold in the ground and you covered it with a bunch of trash. The trash are all of these beliefs that we have incorporated into our false perception of self, our hierophant. And so in order to find the authentic self and experience who we really are, we have to get rid of the trash, and then we have to dig the gold out of the ground. But it's already there. Now, we all are motivated and we need, is not just a matter of want, we need love. Every time that anyone in our range of consciousness has experienced love, it is because the person, the people, or the situation that they're in has provided them with enough of a comfortable feeling that they are willing to surrender their false perception of self. For that period of time that environment allows them to surrender that false perception of self, they have felt their authentic self, which is love. And so consequently, we've not gotten anything from anybody other than permission to surrender our false perception of self and to feel who we already are. We already are what we see. Now, in working with people, marriage counseling, people that have anger issues, particularly marriage counseling is a good illustration to use because two individuals obviously at one time decided that they loved each other. Now, what that meant was that one person recognizes the other person's identity and then the other one reciprocated. So they felt comfortable in their compatibility of hierophant or their false perceptions of self. And so they become, from that point, mutual teachers to each other. And what they are teaching is what have I incorporated into my false perception of self that is not acceptable? How much more of that can I surrender, and how much more of my authentic self can I be, can I feel? When couples have fights, when they have difficulties, when they grow apart in the course of a marriage, then one or both of them has slipped back into that false perception of self, that hierophant, and they are no longer allowing the other person to give them that permission to be their authentic self. Oftentimes, usually, they get over that. Used as an example, the wife is at home, the husband comes in, and he's been out conquering the world all day, and so he brings that false perception of self into the house with him. She immediately is offended by that and says, essentially, will you just take that false perception of self back outside, set it on the front porch, and you come back in here as the authentic you? And that's how we teach each other. And the reciprocal is also true. And I'm just using an example experience. But while one or both of the parties remains in that perception of self and doesn't allow themselves to surrender that to be their authentic self with their spouse, they're going to have difficulty. They're going to be constantly fighting because it doesn't feel good.
And the analogy that you just gave, actually the example that you just gave, it gave me some, I just had, I wouldn't say an idea. I'm not sure an idea or what, but it gave me in terms of, that's in a way that thing of the trading, that false identity. In a way, don't you think that it really goes into a sense of healing, a sense of seeing, as much as one's work in terms of working too hard and not being able to be seen as their work, and they type enemies to create this persona of just as much as it's a false identity, but also it's something that assists them in terms of something that comes with self affirmations.
Self-affirmations?
Yes, in terms of that false identity, don't you think that it aligns with that in terms of not being recognized as an individual? So you create this false identity to align yourself of I would say that substitute it with self affirmations.
Well, the false perception of self, by its very nature, strives to defend itself because that's who we think we are. We perceive that we are that false identity. And so the biggest difficulty for everyone in becoming aware of that false identity and surrendering those individual beliefs that they've incorporated into their identity is it's scary. If you're not who you think you are, then who are you? And so it becomes a process of allowing yourself to be vulnerable, but not with anything outside of yourself. It has to do with becoming vulnerable with yourself, which means you have to learn to be honest with yourself and be aware of truly what it is that you are feeling as opposed to what you think that you are. Self-affirmations can be very helpful to bring your awareness to a particular condition that you are experiencing but in and of themselves, they're not going to contradict the beliefs that you've incorporated into your false identity until you identify the specific belief that you are dealing with, that you have incorporated into your identity. You can have a negative perception of self because of your experiences, and you can do positive affirmations 24 hours a day, and it's not going to change your condition until you become aware of what those beliefs are that you've incorporated into your identity that are causing you to be in that condition of being that you are in.
Mm. And I just want to move to mindfulness and meditation. And the way that I actually understand it, per se, isn't mindfulness sub I would say category of meditation? How are they different in terms of, yeah, how are they different, or is it the same thing?
No, they are closely related, but they're not exactly the same thing. To understand meditation and mindfulness, first understand that we simultaneously exist in both the metaphysical world and the physical world. We, for the most part, perceive ourselves to only be in the physical world. But you and I talking right now are an analog projection of our metaphysical self. And if you think of everyone as being on a sports team, and the sports team practices all week long, we watch game films, the coach yells at us, we do exercises, we practice in order to be better at what we're intending to do in the game. And then Friday night, you have a game. And so consequently, you try to do all of the things that you learned in practice this previous week to have a good performance in the game. When the game's over, then you return to the locker room and you do the same process again. You look at games films, you see what you didn't do right, what you did do right, and so forth. Right now, you and I are experiencing the game. We're in the game. Okay? When we learn to meditate, we learn to go into the guru's cave, as I describe it. When we are not in meditation, we are in the village. All problems exist in the village. No problems exist in the guru's cave. So as we learn to meditate, and it is in and of itself a learning process, we learn to go into that guru's cave, which allows us to have a reprieve from dwelling in the village. And just like going on vacation, when you have been working hard and then you take 2 weeks or even a week to go on vacation, it takes you 2 or 3 days to get out of that workaday mode. And then you relax and you start enjoying your vacation. You come back from your vacation and the same problems existed after your vacation as before your vacation, but you've changed. Your perspective is different. And so you come back with solutions to the problems, not because the problems have changed, but because you have changed. And so the retreat to a meditation on a daily basis allows you the opportunity to go to the guru's cave, change your perspective, to transform you, and to become more of your metaphysical self, not in the village. As you develop that practice, you learn to carry that condition with you when you go back into the village. When you are able to do that, when you develop that skill, then you are practicing mindfulness because you remain in the moment. You remain that guru case perspective when you're going through your experiences of the day.